Hello, everybody. How are you guys? We're continuing our series on Jacksonville, and we're going to be talking about Jacksonville, Florida all week. Yesterday, we just did a quick intro video to get your toes in the water, and this is such a great city. I'm excited about doing this series for Jacksonville because, of course, everybody knows about Jacksonville. But there's so little I really know about it. And when I do these videos, what sets me apart from other history videos or podcasts or travel videos or podcasts is I get down into the nooks and crannies. I talk to the people on the street and find out what's really going on so you guys get the true picture. So in this video, just like the others, I'm going to make it up off the top of my head. Now, in the first video, I mentioned that the French and Spanish and British have been banging around Jacksonville for a very long time. The area itself inhabited by Native Americans for many, many, many years before that. The first ones to show up in the area, I believe, were the French. And they quickly, because they were sailing by, they go, what the heck is that? And what it was is the San Juan River, which is what runs through Jacksonville and is where the city is situated, right there at the Atlantic Ocean. And they said, all right, that's ours. They claimed it for France and built a cafe there where they served espresso, cappuccino and the like, much like they would it back home in France. And they left a few soldiers there to man the cafe, and also they built a church called Our Lady of Dominant Beaches. Now the next people to show up were the Spaniards, and Spain didn't like this cafe. They didn't like the church. They didn't like the French nosing in on what, for some reason, they perceived as their territory. So the head of Spain, a guy named Philip Screwdriver, he told them, "Hey, man, I want you to decimate any forts in that area and take it over." So the Spain armed forces took over the cafe, took over the church, and the French had started building a fort, but of course they have to take 18 breaks a day to have a cigarette and an espresso, and the fort was only half built when Spain came running around taking over everything. So Spain did that a lot of times in Florida, and that's why you have such a Spanish influence in the culture and the names and the places of Florida. Much like this name of the state. Get what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm saying? And Spain basically said, "Man, we don't care what you all doing. We're going to take Florida for ourselves so that we can get all that Disney World tax money." That's how the Spanish spoke in 1600s. That's exactly how they spoke. So now that raises a question. One of the questions I got from my first video is, I mentioned that Jacksonville's in Duval County. Duval County, of course, named after David Duvall, the famous golfer. And it's somewhat of a tribute also to the role that golf plays in the area, because there's a lot of golf organizations that are headquartered in Jacksonville. The National Four-Eyed Golfers Association, the National Sandsabelt Golfers Association, the National Spray on Hair Golfers Association, the National Wales on Corduroy Pants Golf Association. They're all there in Jacksonville. And so not only that, but Spain, when they first showed up, they were all in those ships with the oars. I don't know what you call those ships, but they're sailing ships, but they also have oars so you can row. Well, all those oarsmen, they're sitting on golf bags. And Spain has a long history of golf. A lot of people say, well, golf was invented in Scotland, around there. Maybe, but Spain was pretty close, and they had a similar sport that many people called golf. And Spain was much quicker with the golf bag. And they used it as a bench that the oarsmen would sit on in those sailing ships with the rowers. What do you call those? Oars. And so for that reason, that's why Spain, if you look at some of these strong Spanish players in worldwide golf today, they're all very good at the short game. And the reason being is they showed up on these shores of America on the beaches with their golf bags and golf equipment and just immediately started practicing their sand shots because of the endless beaches in St. Augustine, San Juan, Jacksonville, that whole area. So the question I get then, well, if the area was named Duval County after David Duvall's great-grandfather who helped settle the area. So we're talking about the transition time between when the Native Americans were in the area and dominated the area and lived and worked in the area, to when the European settlers showed up and the transition started to take place from the dominantly Native Americans to the European influence. So people say to me, well, why is it named Jacksonville then? Well, that was David Duvall's great-great-great-grandfather. I forget how many greats or how many generations that was, but his name was Jackson Duvall. And he was a star golfer of those days, of those early days. And he actually opened a golf shop and a 9-hole course right there at the mouth of the San Juan River to help the Spaniard. He was not, because once Spain kind of kicked the French out, they were still around. The French are always around, man. They're always lurking, and they were around. So as were the British were on one side of the river, and also the Canadians. You always got Canadians trying to get out of that cold. And how do you know if they're Canadians or not? Man, they are pasty white. If you see some people walking around Florida that are super pasty white, and I don't mean the Boston white or Philadelphia white. I'm talking about pasty, like sheets of paper Canadian white. That's because they haven't seen sun for 4 or 5 years usually, and they come rolling around. So Jackson Duvall, David Duvall's great whatever it is grandfather, who helped settle the land, he was the friend of all, they said, and basically the mayor of the town, and so he's really the key player in the settlement of Jacksonville. And because he was a friend of all, one of the reasons was he wanted everybody to enjoy golf, and he wanted them all to come to his driving range. He wanted them all to buy his signature Jackson Duvall clothing line that he had in the pro shop that his wife made in the shop out back next to the machine that cleaned the golf balls for the driving range. And he wanted people to sign up for lessons so that he could teach them the Duvall method, which has really been a dominant and a significant teaching method in professional golf ever since. So that's the stuff. That's a little clarification on things that I covered earlier in the original video. So what we're just going to talk a little bit now is the early days and how it developed from when the Spain kicked the French out, and they just kind of moved down the beach a bit because they like a good beach and they like to wear Speedos. If they're not wearing, just their birthday suit. That's the other thing. They like to come rolling around on those beaches in Florida. This is before the decency laws came into effect, and that was mainly influenced by the British. So France and Spain, they don't mind walking around without any clothes on, and in fact, they do that today. You can go to France and walk on almost any public beach, and you'll see naked people. Now you see, because it's allowed. It's allowed by law. Now you may say, well, that sounds very exciting. But if you've ever been there and seen most of the people that aren't wearing any clothes, you would almost want to vote for a law that they have to wear clothes, because it's just a wide variety of people and it may not be what you're thinking. But in those days, the British were the ones that didn't like people walking around without any clothes on because, they're British. And of course, those are the days where they were starting their campaign to take over the world, where they went into India and then Antarctica and all those places that they had such an influence when they said the sun never sets on the British Empire. Well, it would have been nice if the British went out actually in the sun to get some, but no, they had to wear their clothes all the time on the beach. So you had these British soldiers on the beach in their full British uniform, and then you had the French and the Spanish walking around without a thing on. And so that's when Britain started to enact these laws and try to impose them on this virgin country, which was yet to be a country. And that, of course, is the United States of America. But the British came out with a rule that they called the Florida clothing rule. And that is that anybody on the beaches of what they called the country of Florida at that time, if you can imagine Florida being a country. I mean, Florida might be if Florida was a country today and had their own army and went to war, then no one would show up because they're either on the rides at Disney World or they're on the beach working on their tan or surfing. So nonetheless, the British came up with this rule and they nailed it to the door of the tavern because they knew the French for sure would see it at the tavern and the Spanish as well. So they nailed this new rule that they came up with out of the blue without having the authority. They're just like, we're the British. We do what we want, right? I mean, that was a different time. And they nailed these rules to the door of the tavern, the door of the bar, door of the fort, door of the hotel, door of the French cafe, and that they had forced to move down the beach, okay, through intimidation and cutting off the supply line of espresso. And it basically said, listen, you guys can enjoy these beaches all you want, but you got to put clothing on. So to keep the peace for the time being until they could get reinforcements in, they really didn't have enough soldiers to go up against the British. The commanders of both the Spanish and French armies said, go ahead and put on the least amount of clothing you can get away with on the beach to appease the French. To appease the British. So that's where they came up with the original Speedo. That's how the Speedo was invented. Because if you've ever seen a Speedo, it's basically like this minimal bathing suit. And it's really, today, kind of, it makes you, when you see somebody in a Speedo, it gives you a queasy feeling, like you're gonna maybe get sick or something, because I don't know what it is, but it's just the way, the shape of it and the way it fits, and it's I would prefer that international bathers and international swimming enthusiasts adopt the American method, and that is you wear shorts that almost look like basketball shorts. That is much more appealing to a person that is not the non-Speedo wearer. Meaning the rest of us. I don't know how certainly it was invented there on the beaches of Jacksonville, but it made its way back to Spain and France and became the de facto, swimming suit for the next 350 years or however many, because you see it today. Well, I'd like to suggest with all respect that they drop the Speedo and adopt the American method because, like I say, if you are anybody but the Speedo wearer, you prefer them with longer shorts. So that kind of answers the name of the town, Jacksonville. That answers that question. I hope it does. And it gives you a little bit more clarity on the very early days and how the town became such a center for golf. Like today, you still see there's TPC Sawmill there. They got TPC Saw You at the Dance last night. They got the TPC Stacked Deck, the TPC Impossible Course, the TPC I'm going to throw my woods in the my 3 metal into the pond course. They've got all of these courses owned and run by the TPC. There must be 17, 18 courses in the Jacksonville city limits itself. There's so much golf. And that all began way back when the Spain showed up with their golf bags, rowing those big ships. And of course, ever since then, they've been the masters of the sand wedge. I hope that gives you a little more clarity on the early days, guys. We're going to have so many more videos on Jacksonville. In fact, we're going to look at some of the biggest movies that are centered, or their stories are centered around Jacksonville and the Jacksonville area. And we'll talk about the movie stars that were in those movies, and we'll interview some of the people that were in the movies themselves, either behind the scenes or actually on celluloid. So it's going to be so much fun. Come on back, guys.